teachers. What is the most NSFW thing you have done in your classroom? Story 1. Okay, I'm not proud of this, but here we go. It was my first year teaching in high school English to a bunch of thugs. I was only a few years older than some of them. Near the end of class, 2 guys are arguing loudly, and I tell them to knock it off. They ask me to settle their argument for them. This one kid, let's call him Greg, says, "If some guy points a gun at your head and tells you to give him a BJ, you have to do it, right?" "Greg," I say, "that's not a conversation to have during my class." The whole class is listening intently now. "Well," says Greg, "if someone put a gun to my head and told me to give them a BJ, I'd do it." "Well, Greg," I said, "I'll remember that the next time I have a gun." The class erupts in laughter. Somehow I didn't get fired.
We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description.
Story 2. This isn't NSFW, but in retrospect, it was careless and could have gotten me in a lot of trouble. My neighbor had a mannequin that was the same height as me. I had a Pinhead mask. Halloween was a little over a week away. I couldn't resist. Day 1. Students enter the class and see Pinhead sitting behind my desk. They know it's me, and they're right, it's me. But for 5 minutes into the period, I refuse to move or talk. After 5 minutes, I take off the mask and start teaching. I never talk about the mask. Day 2. Students enter and see Pinhead again, sitting at my desk. The bell rings and class begins. After a minute, I walk into the room and start teaching. Students get nervous and start looking at Pinhead, who is sitting at my desk. When they ask me about it, I refuse to acknowledge it. "Focus on class," I would tell them. Day 3. Pinhead is still sitting at my desk. I am at the front of my class. As I predicted, students are now more courageous. They approach the mannequin and try to touch it. I preempt it by admitting that yes, it's just a mannequin. I knock on its head so they can hear the hollow plastic underneath. Even so, throughout class, I see them stealing worried glances at the mannequin. Day 4. Pinhead is still there at the desk. I tell the students, sorry, I just haven't taken him home yet, since it's weird to leave the school with a life-sized mannequin. We laugh. Day 5. Pinhead is still there. I tell my students that I'm actually quite enjoying his company. I make him a prop in my Spanish class using him to model dialogue. "Oh, teacher, you're so quirky." Day 6. Mannequin Pinhead remains. I remind students that their chapter exam is in 3 days. That's on Halloween. They complain. Day 7. Pinhead still sits at my desk in the same position. Students are forgetting about him now. Day 8. Pinhead is old now. Seriously, teacher, the joke is getting old. Day 9. Test day. Students begin a huge, fake unit exam. Their heads are buried in concentration. I am standing at the front of the class. Pinhead is at the back, sitting at my desk. Without making a sound, Pinhead gets up and walks towards the students. He doesn't growl or lunge, he just walks. Students panic. Desks are knocked over. They run, screaming out of the room, clear down to the other end of the hallway. Teachers come pouring out of their classrooms. The principal and vice principal come running at full speed from the floor below. It is chaos, absolute chaos. It's my favorite moment as a teacher. I don't understand how the mannequin moved. I'm missing something here. Was it OP's neighbor who had the mannequin who became Pinhead? I don't get it. The absolute chaos it caused either way, though, sounds really, really good. Story 3. Teaching a science class about goats and sheep. To show the kids, middle schoolers and high schoolers, the animals up close, we planned on going to a livestock auction. To prep them for the auction, I told them to not point or raise their hands because it was a real auction, and they might bid on the animal accidentally. For the respect of the community and business, they shouldn't do anything that looked like they were bidding. Then the questions came. What if we bid? Who would have to pay for it? What if I raise my hand and ask you a question? What if I think the animal is cute and bid on it? One of the kids wouldn't let it go, so I said, jokingly, if you bid on any of the animals, I'll put you up for auction. It was the only African American in the class. Didn't get fired, but felt awful. I totally understand how something like this can happen as an honest mistake, but that's so good. Hopefully the kid didn't take it hard or anything and everyone just laughed about it, but it makes sense to feel awful about it too because it's a big whoops moment. Story 4. My father's a history teacher at a high school in the city. Once, a particularly churlish student who sat in the front row was blatantly and shamelessly on his phone in the middle of class. Naturally, my father tells him to hand it over. Surprisingly, the kid gives it up without a fight. However, the kid quickly pulls out another phone from his pocket. "I have 2 phones, the kid sneers. He points to the phone in his hand, this one for business, and he points to the phone in my father's hand, and that one is for pleasure. Well then, my father says, that explains why this one is on vibrate. To this day, my dad is surprised that he didn't lose his job right then and there. Story 5. When I was in 8th grade, the class clown thought he was untouchable. He was a man among boys. I believe he was held back a year, taller than just about anybody and growing in his facial hair. He was always doing whatever he wanted, throwing food at lunch, skipping class, and just about anything that he would feel would get a reaction. All the girls loved him too. They thought he was the hottest thing on this side of the sun. So they usually let him get away with saying or doing things most of us couldn't. One day, I guess all of that got to his head, because he was flirting with a group of girls in the back of the class, and decided to whip out his dong. But not only did he whip it out, he put it on the kid's shoulder in front of him and showed it off to the girls around him. He got in trouble because little Susie got scared by the anaconda and screamed. Everyone turned around and the classroom erupted with all kinds of reactions. Best I remember were Mrs. French letting out an, "Oh my God!" and the kid who had dong shoulder screaming like a little girl. Story 6. Not a teacher, but in training. I was in placement within a primary school and a little kid crapped himself. I felt really bad for him and went to get a teacher without others finding out. But this kid started screaming that someone had crapped under his desk. I then realized he had scooped it out and threw it under his desk and squishing it under his shoe for authenticity, I guess. Anyway, then I had to escort a whole class out of a classroom and tell the real story to a teacher, who suspended the child for 2 days. This poor kid was so desperate to be like, I can't be known as the poop kid, I can't do it, that he staged his own sabotage. I don't know what to call it. But whatever it is, he staged it and got very caught. That's definitely going to go over worse than what the teacher had in mind. Story 7. Not a teacher, but this happened when I was in high school about 35 years ago. My English teacher was the hot teacher in the school. One day she's sitting at her desk and I had a question to ask. I raised my hand, went to her desk, and from where she was sitting and where I was standing, and the dress she was wearing, I could see a good deal down her top. I said, "Wow, look at all those freckles," and went on to my question without missing a beat. Fast forward to the end of the school year as we are taking our final exams, and she walks over to my desk, slowly leans over so I could get a good look, and whispers, "I've not worn this dress since you commented on all my freckles. Now it's your turn to blush." She smiles and walks away. All I'm saying is if a guy teacher did something like this, nuh-uh, fired immediately. But also, props to the teacher for taking it kind of well, I guess, instead of getting really offended about it. I don't know. Weird situation. I don't know what to say. Story 8. I was teaching 5, 7 to 8-year-olds beginning woodworking at a private school, and we were painting our projects. We were in a room alone and I was a 35-year-old male. A young girl who was wearing denim shirts and a skirt got paint all over her skirt. I caught myself with my hand under her skirt trying to wash the paint off with a wet cloth and thought, what would anyone think if they walked in on this scene? I let her clean the paint off as best she could and finished the class. It scared the hell out of me. Story 9. I teach college English. The focus of my class this semester was rhetoric, and my personal research interest is rhetoric of the body, and I brought in some body-related art. This included, among other things, 4 pictures of genitalia. Please note that these images were accompanied with discussion and put into context of the class. They weren't just put up on the screen for no reason. Basically, we talked about the argument each image presented and how it made use of ethos, pathos, and/or logos. I also found it very interesting that one of the guys in the class was like, "Wow, I had no idea that kitties were even different at all." That alone made the whole thing worthwhile. It's so important to know that people know bodies come in all shapes and sizes. I also once gave one of my own presentations that I was due to give at a conference the next week to one of my classes. It was about self-injury as rhetorical, and included several images of self-injured bodies. This was also accompanied with discussion, and I made sure to let everyone know what the context was and they were free to leave if they felt uncomfortable. At some point during reading that, I totally forgot that OP said college. And I was thinking, this is in high school? I looked at some of the images they posted because it was originally like this, and this, but obviously we can't put them up here, so... Anyway, I looked at the images and I'm like, wow, you cannot show these in a high school, and then at college age. It makes sense. Still, I don't really get the argument that some of these are making. One of them was a picture of just a dude's lower half with his dong standing at attention but lying down and a towel covering the top half of him. I don't get it. I don't get it. Maybe I need to take OP's class. Story 10. Had a class of 6 retesters. The retest results came back in early December and they had all passed. Since I knew I wouldn't have them back in my class after Christmas break, I thought, screw it. and decided to culture them by showing them Pulp Fiction over the course of 3 days if they promised not to say a word to the administration. The only part I skipped was the assault, but I got away with showing them clean. Story 11. On my last day of student teaching, I agreed to play Cards Against Humanity with some of the students. When it was my turn to judge, instead of putting in relevant white cards, the students put in the most vulgar cards they had. Hearing the student teacher read the cards really made the students crack up. Story 12. There was this juggalo in my freshman math class that was a real jerk to everyone. The teacher was the football coach. The juggalo kid was saying some real nasty stuff to this sweet quiet girl, and we all told him to stop, but he didn't. The coach got up and told him that he better knock it off or there were going to be problems. The juggalo kid stood up on his seat and yelled, "What the hell are you going to do, old man?" Coach went over, grabbed him by the front of his shirt and lifted him up, and put his back against the wall. I don't know what he said exactly, but when he put the kid down, the kid said that he was going to get the coach fired. I still remember the coach slowly turning around and saying, "I've taught here for over 30 years. I've led this school to many victories. They love me. You are a little jerk who has no respect for anybody and will never amount to anything. Who do you think they will believe?" This happened years ago, so it's a little hazy, but that's basically how it went. He was also the teacher who fought to advance my really good stoner friend to the next math level. My friend would only show up about half the time and never turn in homework. But Coach told the administrators that my friend wasn't dumb, just not challenged. It would be a waste of all their time to hold him back to take a course he had already mastered. They gave my friend the final and he passed with a high B. I wish more teachers were like this. I'm not sure what freshman means here, high school or college, because I think that changes things for me. But in either case, I do think a teacher shouldn't be saying to a kid that they'll never amount to anything. That seems very against the purpose of being a teacher, and also just isn't really true as long as they put in the work, but I don't know. I get it. Sometimes you just want to say that to someone who clearly doesn't care about anything, let alone their own future. So I think the teacher gets a gold star for most things, but that line in particular, I'm a bit about. Story 13. I wasn't a jerk like the juggalo kid in the last story, at least I hope not, but I had a similar situation from the student perspective. In 8th grade, I had a math teacher that was terrible. Almost everyone struggled with him. But it seemed like I had a particularly hard time, and he very clearly hated me for some reason. He would always make personal comments about me in class, criticize me, and call on me to answer when I was clearly lost. He once tore up my homework, threw it away, and gave me an F. Because he told us to staple it at 20 degrees, and I stapled at 25. One day, he and I had a confrontation in class where I felt like I had had enough. He accused me of not caring and not trying. He said, "If you really care about your grade, come to my class after school and I'll help you." So I told my wrestling coach that I would be late to practice and went to the teacher's class to be tutored. When I showed up, he sternly told me to sit down and shut the door. He stood in front of me and said, paraphrasing, "You are a loser. You think it's so cool to be a loser, but it stops here. I will see to it that you are never eligible to wrestle again. You are going to fail my class and probably fail 8th grade. So what are you going to do about it?" I said, "I'll try harder. I'll see if I can get some help from my friends." He interrupted me and slammed his hand down on the desk and got in my face. "You don't get it, do you? You will not pass my class. There's nothing you can do about it." Staring at me, breathing heavily. "So what are you going to do about it?" I was avoiding eye contact and just shrugged my shoulders. He said, "You want to hit me, don't you?" This came completely out of left field. I think he had just seen Breakfast Club too many times because it was almost just like that scene. He leaned down closer to my face and pointed at his chin. He said, "Go ahead, lay it on me. You think you're so tough, take your best shot." I was completely dumbfounded. He kept staring at me and breathing heavily, and I tried to look away. I remember my adrenaline pumping and thinking, if he hits me, I'm gonna kick this guy's butt all over the classroom. He wasn't a very big guy, and maybe he was intimidated by me or something. I don't know what his deal was. But he finally said, "Get the hell out of here." So I thought, I'm going to get this dude fired. I told my wrestling coach what happened, and he kind of brushed it off. Maybe I didn't explain how aggressive he was. But my coach said, "We'll get you paired up with some guys that are good in his class." And he just went back to running drills. I told my parents what happened, and they did everything short of calling me a liar, saying things like, "Oh, I find it hard to believe he would do something like that." The next day, I went to the principal and told him what happened, and he, like my parents, quickly turned the discussion toward my performance in this class. They both implied that I was just making this stuff up because I had an F in his class. I told them both, parents and principal, that if it happened again, I was going to beat him up, which didn't help my case and just made me look like an out-of-control student. The only thing that ever came of it was that I got extra assignments, and my parents had to sign them every night. I ended up passing the class with a D, and I honestly think that class hurt my math forever after that. I am 35 years old now, 21 years later, and I still sometimes fantasize about getting revenge on this guy somehow. This is a prime example of a man who should never, ever teach. I'm talking about the teacher, not OP. How can you have that much resentment for an 8th grade kid? What kind of loser in life do you have to be? Just absolutely moronic behavior from the teacher. I can't believe that people like this exist. Story 14. I was a new student at my high school in grade 10. Beginning of the year assembly is going and the grades are brought in by year, starting with the 9s. Every grade is given a quick speech on responsibility and crap like that. Time for the 10s. The middle-aged Vietnamese science teacher walks up in front of the school and it went something like this. Grade 10 is a confusing time. You're all bags of emotion and hormones. It doesn't really matter what you do this year because it doesn't affect a thing in your life. So have fun, make friends, and be safe. The birds and the bees are pretty important around your age. But if you see a bird banging a bee, you're probably having a bad acid trip and should talk to your dealer. Needless to say, the other speeches weren't as good. Story 15. When I was in 8th grade, the class clown named Jason was being a class clown. My teacher, Mr. Rybzik, told him to knock it off or he'll get hit. Jason giggles like a little girl and then sheepishly tells Mr. Rybzik, "You can't hit me because you're my teacher." Then he giggles a bit more. The class was intrigued. Mr. Rybzik says, "You know what, Jason, you're right. I'm an adult and I'm your teacher, which means by that rule, I can't hit you. But that doesn't mean that Reginald can't." My teacher told Reginald to hit Jason, which he did. A few good punches on his arm. Reginald sat right behind Jason. He was also the biggest kid in class, over 6 feet, and could dunk. Hearing Jason scream was funny to the entire class, and we all laughed and chuckled at his goof up. Story 16. So I have to tell this story now. This is the time. I had just started my first job as a math teacher for a local community college. So fresh, in fact, that I had finished the orientation the day prior, and my account to access the computer was restricted for me. I felt like I needed to show something on my first day of class regarding math, so I decided that using the graphing calculator would be something I could show the whole class, and they could use on their homework. I forgot mine at home, so I looked to the class. I asked if I could use someone's calculator to put on the overhead, so I received one from this innocent girl in the front, kinda reminded me of Egg from Arrested Development, and I commenced the tutorial. I got to graphing, and when I tell everyone to press the graph button, instead of the simple y equals x squared I was hoping for, was instead a giant Etch-a-Sketch dong. Someone had taken the time to draw a very detailed balls and shaft and was a proud 5 feet long on the projector. The whole class burst out in laughter, finding the whole situation hilarious. I immediately pulled away the calculator in embarrassment, but realized that this was not my calculator, but rather the girl that let me borrow it. She came and apologized later, but it makes me wonder how long she left it on there or if she even knew. Story 17. Not my story, but my father's. My dad, a former policeman, was required to be a teaching assistant at a local juvenile delinquency school for a semester for his CJ degree. In reality, he was there to keep the students from beating up the teacher. These kids were all awful, rude, and generally terrible. One day, one of the usual suspects was acting up, harassing the girls in the class and making a ruckus. My father, then 18, told the kid, a 19-year-old sophomore, to settle down and stop harassing the girls. Instead, the guy whipped out his dong and started seeing how close he could get to people's faces before they pushed him away. Tired of this guy's crap, my father sent him out into the hall. He refused to leave, so my dad had to physically restrain and drag him out. When they got out there and my dad told the kid to go to the principal's office, the kid just smirked and got face to face with my dad. "Hey, Teach, if you wanted to suck my dong so badly, you could have done it in there. I wouldn't have minded. I like an audience." At that point, my dad just lost it and punched the guy right in the face as hard as he could. Broken nose, blood everywhere. Guy never acted up again. Story 18. As a student, I must have been 15, we were in English class. I studied in France. And in this fancy language lab we had, each student had a cubicle with a computer, headphones, and a microphone, and must repeat or talk to the computer. Anyway, me being half English, these classes were a joke. And they also were for a friend who was also English. Also, to be noted, the teacher can listen and talk to an individual student or overwrite and speak to everyone. So a student gets to the word erection, as in the erection of a building. You can see where this is going. This particular student was struggling with it, and therefore the teacher started speaking to him. They then each proceeded to repeat the word erection over a dozen times, with even more enthusiasm and throat thrust every time. My mate and I were peeing ourselves laughing, with every other student having no idea why. I nearly died that day.